Great. Thanks very much for that, Sean. Just wait for the presentation to pop up here. There we go. Yeah, so let me quickly provide a little bit of a background. So I've been in the early stage company space for, I think it's 27 years now. Cellar Insights will be my 7th company that I've been working with. Prior to that, I was with Nortel, 5 years in finance, 5 years in product, so a vast array of experiences. And close to home here, I attended University of Alberta, where I got my mechanical engineering degree while playing hockey for the Bears, and then moved on for a small stint in the energy sector before returning to do my MBA, and that's when I left and went on to Nortel. So I've had some great experience and worked with some great teams, and now the journey has taken me to Cellar Insights, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of the agenda, the origin story, the market problem, the opportunity that we're addressing, as well as Potato Storage 101, just a bit of a background for those who aren't familiar what goes on with potatoes. My colleagues that aren't in agriculture are fascinated when I bring this up over a dinner conversation in terms of what goes into potato storage, so hopefully share some of that. And then lastly, what we're doing at Cellar Insights tied to the RDAR initiatives that we've been supported by. Oh, is it working? So it's working. Oh, top one. So before I move on, I wanted to quickly show here, so the long-term storage is often referred to as a second season. A lot of investment and opportunity goes into the growing side of the operation, investments, capital, a lot of innovation, but ultimately the second season, or when harvest happens and potatoes and other root vegetables, et cetera, go into storage, it's often a forgotten aspect. And so I'll talk a little bit about what's happening there. But long-term storage is often referred to as a second season. I want to refer also to this storage facility. This is a characteristic of about a 15 to 20-year-old storage facility. You'll see these all along the highway down in Tabor, Lethbridge area. This loading is happening such that that bin is being filled probably within 5 or 6 feet of that domed facility, and then you see that it's a dirt floor with culverts that are laid as the potatoes are loaded into that bin. Important to note, because I'll tell you a little bit about how it's progressing these days. Safe harbor statement, bottom line is there's a lot of things that are uncertain. That's about what research is. We're actually applying some of the research that's been done in the past in a practical sense and looking for a commercial opportunity for growers and processors in the marketplace. This is Ross Cobleson. Ross is a 6th generation potato grower out of Florenceville, New Brunswick. Ross is an individual that loves to tinker. He loves to look at things. He's an innovator. And ultimately, he's been involved with potatoes for a number of years. He saw the investment happening on the on the crop side of things to increase yield by 3, 4, 5, 8% year over year. But then noted that when potatoes go into storage, that on a good storage facility, you'll automatically lose 4% through respiration. Top that with potential for rot issues, quality issues, diseases, etc., and that loss can increase substantially from that small 4%. So when you're investing to create 6 or 7% and you're ultimately putting in storage and losing, he felt that there was an opportunity here. Hence, Cellar Insights was born. Bottom line is, we're looking to empower growers and processors to reduce post-harvest losses, strengthen food security, and boost resource efficiency through actionable insights. And so for us, our objective is to maximize the value for the grower, reduce the risk of the supply chain for the processor, and ultimately run storage as a competitive advantage. So a little bit of the origin story. Cellar Insights was founded in 2023 through Carrot Ventures, which is a venture studio model. Ross approached Carrot Ventures, says, I think I have an idea. I think there's an unserved part of the market. Here's what I'm thinking we need to do. He sold that story to Carrot Ventures out of Calgary, and ultimately they did due diligence and then created an entity for Cellar Insights, vended in the work product and the IP to that point, and stood up an organization, provided some working capital, and then we started. I joined shortly after that. As a result of where we were, we've had successful grant initiatives that have supported us along the way, RDAR being, of course, one of those. But IRAP, through the commercial innovation, Alberta Innovates is sponsored through their commercial associate program, has allowed us to advance the hiring of individuals. We have the initial RDAR grant. This is the second one, and it's a carry-on from what we're doing, what we did before, and then CANE. So the RDAR grant that we're working with now is a continuation where it's early detection of rot in storage bins. We went out for pre-seed financing a year after standing the company up. The market was tough. Capital was very tough to raise. We didn't have a lot of a success. There was intrigue, but a lot of people that chose to stay on the sidelines. Carrot, as the founding entity, came to the table with initial seed capital of about $1 million for Carrot Ventures. We followed that up about a year, 15 months later with our first formal seed financing. It ended up being oversubscribed. The market changed substantially. And we closed that in August 2025. Co-leads on that were Accelerate Fund 4, as well as Tallgrass Ventures out of Calgary. And then we had Carrot participate, along with the University of Alberta Fund, and then University of Calgary Seed Fund, and Angels. Most recently, in fact, Friday we closed in terms of money hitting the bank, and this morning I noticed that the press releases went out. We added SVG and Thrive to our cap table. So now we've raised a substantial amount of money that we can take this business forward with a specific focus on long-term storage. So why storage? Ultimately, global post-harvest losses are in excess of $100 billion across multiple crops. Obviously, potatoes, apples, onions, etc. But for us, because of Ross's background, potatoes is our focus, specifically processed potatoes. And we're looking to address loss types that include rot, disease, shrink, quality, sprouting, all the things that will contribute to ultimately a loss in value to the grower and a concern for the processor. So what happens with potatoes? One of the things that was mentioned earlier, Alberta is now the #1 potato producing province in the country. The combination of Alberta, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and PEI make up 78% of the production in Canada. So those are the three markets. Ross exists and was a founder in New Brunswick. The headquarters are here in Alberta, and we're in the process of hiring into the province of Manitoba. Interesting enough, 60% of all potatoes produced globally end up in some sort of a processed state. 60% of the 60 is ultimately French fries of one sort or another, and then the other 20% or another 20% in sort of chips, the potato chips, the Lays, the Frito-Lays, etc. that you find, and ultimately making it to the consumer through that supply chain. Why this is important and why storage is important, when you're looking at processed potatoes, specifically fries and chips, things like sugars are important, taste, processing in terms of how they go through the factory. Color, McDonald's is adamant that that bouquet of French fries has got to look special, and so they are very, very focused on the color of the color that comes out of the frying of potatoes, and then ultimately specific gravity. Specific gravity is extremely important due to the processing and the cutting aspect of when a potato goes through the factory and ultimately ends up into a French fry, for example. Interesting enough, the combination of Canada and US, where our focus is now, is the ranked #4 globally with 550 million hundredweight of potatoes produced on an annual basis, which equates to about $8.2 billion. So a substantial market. Interesting enough, if you look at China, it's about 4 times bigger than that. India, twice as big as that. And then the Ukraine, which is the 1, 2, and 3, is about the same size as the US as far as production. So what is the storage challenges? Well, this is an example of a current storage or a newer storage. Interestingly enough, you'll see that this pile here, or this bin here, is about 200 feet by 50 feet, and then it's 18 feet deep. On the top left corner is a mezzanine, so you can walk the pile, and I'll explain to you why that's important. But ultimately, the age-old process of checking on the bin was walking it on a daily basis and visually observing, is the pile depleted when I look at it from the top? If I look at the cross tubes for airflow, do I see any sort of liquid coming out of the pile? And then ultimately, do I smell anything? Literally going in and using your nose to detect whether there is a rot problem happening. And so this is where Ross saw that there was an opportunity, and ultimately felt that if you can't manage what you don't measure, and so there's an opportunity to get measurements happening. This is a typical cycle of a potato after harvest. The numbers are probably not right, so anybody out there that is close to potato growing would argue with some of these numbers, but ultimately there's phases that happen once a potato is harvested. Number one is the potato's pulp temperature has got to be at least 55 or lower when it's coming out of the ground. What's interesting about that is in southern Alberta, if you have warm temperatures you're on harvest, then it can create a problem. Warm potatoes going into storage typically will present an opportunity where the rot will accelerate or become a problem. So So it goes through various phases: drying, pre-cooling, and treatment period, and then obviously down to a temperature, ideal storage temperature in that 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, or even lower for seed potatoes. Why is that important? You're basically pushing that potato into a dormant state, which makes it more attributable to last for a long-term storage. So this is extremely interesting. You'll see that humidity is 90 or 95%. Manitoba will run probably around 90% on their storages, where in southern Alberta you're pushing 97, 98%. And so it's a very harsh environment. The three things that are measured during storage traditionally are humidity, CO2, and temperature. Those are the levers that the grower has, in essence, to manage those potatoes through storage and ensure quality is maintained. This is an example of one of those dome type of storage facilities. So when potatoes go into storage, they are then part of the process which actually feeds the factory. You heard Simplot, Cavendish, McCain's, and Lamb Weston and others that basically rely on potatoes on a 365-day-a-year basis to ultimately ensure that the efficiency of their factories and utilization is up. So it's important that growers have the ability to store potatoes for a long period of time. The processors then look to see who can store long based on the facilities they have, based on the management practices they have, such that they can maintain that quality through the entire season. So what they'll typically do is schedule some growers earlier, some growers later, and then some as long as 10 or 11 months. And we, in fact, were in a bin last year where that grower stored over 12 months potatoes. Here's a factory of Simplot factory outside Portage la Prairie in Manitoba. A Frito-Lay factory, again from a chips perspective, and then a McCain factory that you will see in fact, they doubled it in the Tabor area. So given all that, we launched our product, which was a platform to basically initially provide an interface for monitoring of those CO2, temperature, and humidity with thresholds. The thresholds are simply ensuring that the environmental conditions within storage stay within the realms that the grower is looking for. And by the way, growers all have their own way of doing things. Why they do things the way they do is because Dad did it that way and Granddad did it that way, and overall they've had years and years of what they would refer to as relative success. We see an opportunity through technology and just a general socialization that we can get better by sharing practices such that the bar gets raised for everybody. We have the proactive alerts, which I talked to. If you exceed a temperature, a CO2 level, you'll get an on-platform alert as well as an off-platform alert, should you choose to. And then early detection and tracking of rot is something that we're focused on now. And then lastly is we've introduced trending reports with the platform, so you can see things that are happening over time, whether it's the last 24 hours, last 7 days, last 30 days, as well as comparative across the various bins that you have. Here's an illustration of a potato storage facility for those that aren't familiar. So what happens typically is on the left-hand side, you'll see large fans that will initiate the flow of air through the facility. On the right side there, in this particular facility, is a cooling cooling wall that ultimately allows the grower to reduce temperature. This becomes important if you're storing upwards of 9 to 10 months, because now you're into June, July, and August. And so that's something that is extremely important and not everyone will invest in. Behind the cooling wall is the humidification wall. This is not unlike what you have at home on your furnace, a humidifier, such that there is water down the cooling wall which introduces humidified air into the process. That air then is pushed down the plenum, and if you look at the bottom of that picture that just came up on the screen, you'll see the cross ventilation. In this particular case, that cross ventilation is done through concrete channels versus the steel culverts that was evident on that first picture. That air is then pushed under. In this case here, it's a concrete floor versus the dirt, slotted such that airflow can happen and push up through the potatoes that exist in the storage facility. And after that, it's basically recycled down into the return, and subsequently that journey starts all over again. So what do we do around that? And we're not the only ones, so I don't want to convey that, is we've introduced a LORAN wireless battery-operated sensors that we put into storages that are looking for that capability. A lot of the newer storages have that, and I'll address that in a second. But ultimately, we're reading sensors that have the humidity, temperature, and CO2 at the return, in storage, which is usually the far end of the storage facility, at the plenum, and then we also go exterior to understand what the external temperatures are around the facility. That's all done through a LoRaN, which is like a Wi-Fi inside the building, and then we backhaul with a cellular signal, which then ultimately goes through the network and ends up on our cloud to feed the application that we present in front of the growers. Lastly, is we've integrated with a number of existing providers, so they have sensors in facilities, the newer facilities, they're operated, they're integrated, Techmark and IVI being a couple of examples. We now pull data directly from them to feed the information that we're looking for to do our machine learning and AI work around predicting spoilage and early rot detection inside of a bin. So that's where we introduce, in this case, the rot detection unit that we've introduced into the field. So it's a harsh environment, as I mentioned. There's a humidification wall. There's a sense of the humidity that's in this particular bin. It's high. This is one in southern Alberta. And they have spinners to introduce even more moist air. You can see on our sensor here that water is actually dripping. So those sensors are IP67, if anybody's curious. That means they're watertight, and only the sensor itself sits below the housing, which ultimately protects the electronics. Obviously, electronics and water don't mix well, so it's imperative that that boundary exists for that product. In this particular case, our handheld indicated that that venue is at 100% humidity. Why is the humidity so high? Potatoes are 80% water. If you can maintain the humidity level such that the water loss or respiration is minimized, then ultimately you minimize the loss of weight, which is ultimately one of the values that a grower gets paid on and they deliver at the end of the storage season. So this is what we're doing with respect to our RDAR grant. We're looking to evolve the rot sensing that we initiated a year ago, again through a grant that we received. Now we're expanding that. Our objective is to put 100 bins in play with rot sensors and another 20 or 25 bins with an additional gas and volatile sensor measurements. So we do the combination of both. This is just a quick example. On the top, on the left-hand side, the bottom is our original sensor, which is for rot. On the top, we've added the array of sensors for incremental gas detection that is typical in a rotting situation. In the middle, you'll see the initial one on the left, the new one on the right, and on the far right, you'll see that the beta unit that we introduced has the sensors hanging below the box, which then houses the power system as well as the wireless connectivity back to our base. So a quick case study in terms of how this is beneficial. So 2 years ago, so not this current storage season, but the previous one, this example presented itself. In early December, we started to see our rot sensor start to pick up. So there was a slow ramp up indicating that there was something going on in the facility. 42 days later, mid-January, was the first sign that a grower could smell something going on. So arguably, we were 42 days ahead of when he otherwise would have seen it, which gives him an advance in terms of things that he may choose to do, whether to ship early, whether to take on a mitigation strategy. A mitigation strategy in this case would simply be to reduce some of the humidification that happens, blow drier air through the pile, try and dry out that rot that's taking place. And then in this particular case, as a result of taking that strategy, it plateaued, stayed solid. He then reached a point where he was comfortable, went back to a normal practice with the humidity ranges he wanted to use, and then continued on through the season. So he's able to, in this case, deliver the highest yield possible. So he got paid for his weight. He also gets paid for the amount of time he stores the product, and then the quality in this case ended up being above average, so he had also that bonus aspect on top of what he ended up delivering. So again, a result or a database decision versus something that was intuitive or subjective previously. Last slide that I'll show you is this indication here. It's not the greatest with respect to some of the scaling. We try to put everything on one chart. What you'll see, the blue top line is humidity. You'll see that it's basically saturated, running at 98 to 100%. And then you'll see on the bottom here some of the CO2 levels as well as temperature. You can't really see based on scale how the temperature was introduced into the facility about 50, 52 degrees and slowly declined over the storage such that it put it into a dormant state. The black bar is when the grower identified that there was a problem through normal practices, which he started to smell a problem. What we then looked at was through machine learning and taking into consideration the various data inputs was the green line, which is basically an indication of rot. So our objective now is to look at existing collected data using sources of truth to ultimately end up with a machine learning model that can allow us to predict a rot risk potential in a given storage. So I'd like to thank our investors, our grant providers, specifically RDAR in this case, who's been very supportive with the 2 grants that we've achieved. And then Quattro Ventures, I know some of you may be familiar with Emily Ford. Emily and the Quattro facility has been extremely supportive for the initiatives we have, and we have access to all of their bins on the farm. So with that, Cellar Insights, we're helping growers and processors improve reliability, volume, and quality of their post-harvest yields. Thank you very much.
Great job, Terry. Very impressive. From a commercialization standpoint, what's the barrier for the grower? Because it seems to be like, this totally makes sense. If I was growing potatoes, I should have this. What's the barrier?
Like a lot of things in market, there's 2 that are not related to the technology. So the technology advancement, I would say, is continuing. We've seen a huge amount of changes in terms of capability of doing things with sensors, just picking things up. And now with AI and machine learning, the ability to take it to the next level exists. The challenge in this industry is behavioral. Not a lot of people want to making changes, and when they do, it takes a while. So the cycle is an annual cycle. People like to try it before they actually step in. So for us, it's about getting the influencers in the space, the growers that other growers look to as people that understand that they have a big operation, they're progressive in their thinking, they ultimately want to go forward. So that's by far the biggest. And the last would be commercial. I mean, one thing, with some of the sensors that we've identified, they're way too expensive to commercially launch. There's just no margin left for the grower. And so there's a sensitivity there with a lot of things we've seen where pricing and costing at the early stages is a barrier.
Let's give the CEO of Cellar Insights, Terry Sydoryk, a big round of applause.